couple of years back, we had this terrific reunion of my grandfather's descendants in Carrick, and I was asked to do a talk at this thing, and I didn't really know what to say, and I started talking about my perception of being living next door to these people, and how it affected me as a child, and so on and so forth. And there were so many people there from America that didn't really know very much about their own background. And I got so much feedback. I was amazed at how interested they were. And I sort of made a promise myself that I'd write it out and send it to them, and send them to bring things into perspective for them. But that's 18 months ago, and it's just amazing the different circumstances that are now, because even since then, a lot of the people who were there are no longer with us. And as you know, there have been a lot of deaths in our family in the meantime. And this idea came to me at my brother Jim's funeral. I was just thinking back, there Jim now is the last one who really worked in this company as a tradesman. And my mind goes back to when I was young. I guess I was maybe about 10 or 11. I was talking to my father one day, and I asked him, when did he start, or I said, Daddy, what was the first job you ever did? And he says, well, believe it or not, the first job ever I did, he says, was when my father and my Uncle Mickey were making the furniture for the chapel. I started my apprenticeship with them. And they were working in this big barn down in Lower Carrick, belonged to the landlords. And they were assembling the seats, the pews in the chapel. He says, my first job was to go along all these and with a mallet and a chisel and chamfer every one of those seats. So I kept thinking about this all through my life. Every time I went into the chapel, I would say to myself, this whole thing was put in here by my father and my grandfather and his uncle. And I got a great thrill out of it, and I thought, wouldn't it be great now if I could tell people about this, raise people interest in it. When I was on the altar, I think it was maybe 10 or 11 years of age, every Sunday you'd be looking up in the gallery, and my grandfather was always sitting in the same seat in the gallery. The third seat from the end on the left-hand side, the third seat from the front. And I often wondered now, why did he sit up there? I went up one day and I sat and I looked around, and I could see everything. Everything that you could see was his work and his brother's work. So I had this idea, maybe this is why he just was sort of thinking back about the good days when he was working. And it came to me then how close our whole family and the whole company was to the maintenance of the chapel and they put in floors and all this sort of stuff. But so the time we're talking about now would be about the turn of the century, 1900. My father would have been at probably 1902 or 1903, because my father would have been about 16 at the time, well, let's say. And when that was finished, my father wanted to further his career, and to finish his apprenticeship, so he came to Derry, and he worked with his company in Derry, and finished his apprenticeship with them. And they worked in a lot of places around Derry. There was one very famous building that my father was very much involved in, was the Colgan Hall in Carndonagh, where he himself and an apprentice as helper were sent down to put in a new staircase and a new ceiling in the Colgan Hall in Carndonagh. And he was the only carpenter on the job at the time. And that's since become a very famous point of interest for people. The Colgan Hall in Carndonagh was, it fell into disuse, and they were going to knock it down at one stage and turn it into a more modern building. And somebody came along and said, no, that this was a listed building because of the quality of the work that my father had done on it. So I was very proud to hear about that.
What was the work particularly that he done? Was it carpentry work? Or?
Carpentry work, yeah. He did built the stairs and put in the balusters and everything, right up to the first floor. And from then I went into this big room, and there was a tongued and grooved ceiling, which is a perfect piece of work. People are still being taken, apprentices are still being taken down to show them how this should be done. And as I was saying, they were about to demolish the building there about 20 years ago. And somebody came up with this, that it would be a son to, so they decided no, instead that they would repair the building, so you can still go in and see this particular piece of work.
Is that just the building itself in Colgan Hall? Did they build the hall, or did they just do the woodwork?
No, he was working for this company in Derry at the time.
Right.
And at that time, they let out different portions of it. So they had the contract of doing this particular thing. And my father was the manager sent down. He had reached that stage of competence at the time that he could do it on his own with just one. Years later, Enda was in Carndonagh. This would be in the 50s. And Enda actually met the guy who was the helper that my father had so many years before. But that's only by the way. He went then, he went to work in the shipyards in Derry. And then he went to work in the shipyards in Belfast, because he had to follow the work wherever the work was. And he was one of the only Catholics who was working in the shipyard. And he had this great friend of his, the two of them worked together. And one day at lunchtime, this fellow says to my father that there's a rumour going round that they're going to come after you, the Protestant boys. And he says, I would advise you to take off. Don't even go back for your tools. So that's what he did. He just took the next boat to Glasgow. So he worked in Glasgow for a number of years.
Would he have got into bother in Belfast? Would he have? There
was just this anti-Catholic thing in the shipyards.
The shipyards were all kind of Protestant.
Shipyards were all Protestant, right. And but it was quite a common thing. If they did come across the odd Catholic that got a job in it, they used to. There was this thing called Belfast confetti or something like that. They would shower you with red hot rivets if you're working, and it's just unbelievable to think about it. They would burn them out, you know.
So you went off to Glasgow?
You went off to Glasgow. So we worked in Glasgow for a number of years, and then the work got scarce there. He moved down to Birmingham, and by the time he got to Birmingham, the War of Independence broke out back at home, So my father became involved with the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and he started collecting ammunition and explosive to send back to Ireland for use against the British. And he did that for a long time. And
he'd actually, when they sent a lot of the arms back, they used to send it back through Arnott's and that as well. Was it Arnott's or one of the shops in Dublin? They used to send back the...
That's right. They sent back the rifles and everything. They wrapped them up in carpets,
right,
and send them into the shops. Different Arnott's and Brown Thomas and all these
right.
big shops, and then the boys would come in and take them with them, you know. But he was very much involved in that. In fact, he served a term in prison because they attacked some ammunition, some gunplay somewhere.
Armory or something?
Armory, yeah. And they were caught and they went to jail there. But then after a while, there was a ceasefire, and he came back to Ireland. And when he came back to Ireland, shortly after he came back to Ireland, after the War of Independence, the Civil War broke out. So he became involved straight away in the IRA, the anti-partitionists. And he went on the run, and there was a lot of he operated mostly down about the Midland counties, Meath and Westmeath down there. But eventually, anyway, he was captured, and he was incarcerated in Kildare, some prison in Kildare, not the Curragh, some other place. But they were there for a long time, and eventually, because of pressure from the church to give up their allegiance to the anti-partition cause, the church decided that they wouldn't give them absolution. So my father said that's okay.
Were they excommunicated?
They weren't actually excommunicated, but they refused the sacraments.
Right.
Which is, wasn't. But during the course of his incarceration there, his own brother, who was a commandant in the camp, came up to talk to him, and my father refused to talk to him.
Was that Charlie or Josie or?
I think it was Charles.
Charles. Yeah.
But
is that, like, sorry to interrupt, but are you, like, when you talk about Granda being on the anti-partitionist, was, like, how were they split?
Well, this is I'm sorry, I forgot about that. You see, they were on Donegal. They decided they decided to go on join the Free State people. But my father, who was out of touch with them completely, took the opposite tack when he was in England and in Dublin.
Right. So was he the only one out of the brothers?
He was the only one of the brothers, yeah.
I never knew that.
He was IRA man. But they went on hunger strike, actually. Right. He went on hunger strike because of this.
Right.
And he was 35 or 40 days on hunger strike. But eventually the ceasefire came again, and he had to come back home. He was very sick. Came back to Carrick to a very hostile reception from his brothers. Naturally enough, they were on different sides of the political community. But he was there in Carrick. There was an old house where my father's house, or my grandfather's house is now. There was an old house, and he was there sleeping, himself and my grandmother, and nobody else would speak to him but my grandmother. So I always think of.
And how did your grandparents who lived there, how did they feel about all this? I mean, it must have been very tough on them. The brothers were basically at war with one another.
It must have been.
But did your grandfather take sides, or how?
My grandfather seems to be neutral in all this.
Right.
I often do think of this. My grandfather was an old-fashioned man, even for his time, and they worked all their lives for the landlords.
Right.
So he would be a peaceful kind of a man.
Right.
But the sons all went out on active duty and all the rest of it. Unfortunately, they weren't all on the same side. But my father was there, and you can imagine him lying there day after day, nobody talking to him. He was probably depressed, and he wouldn't be feeling well after his long time on hunger strike. And my grandmother was really the only one that he talked to. But eventually my grandmother went to the priest and asked him, would he come in and talk to my father? My father would have been very anti-church at the time. But the priest, who was parish priest in Carrick at the time, was Father Maguire, later Dr. Maguire. He's a very prominent man in the diocese at the time. He wrote the history of the diocese later on. But a very understanding man, and he was talking to my father and urging him to get up and do something and, not be wasting his life. And my father said, well, there's no work now, sure, there's nothing, there's no work going on at all. Everything has come to a standstill. And Dr. Maguire said to him, well, he said, there's a badly needed a new roof on this church in Carrick, and I would like you to take on the contract of repairing the church. And so that was a second connection with the church.
And when he was home at that time, was it depression, or was it? I mean, he must have been ill as well from the.
Of course he was.
From the time in prison and that, and the hunger strike.
I never talked about these things.
Right.
We never talked to him face to face.
Right.
The questions you're asking me, I would love to ask him. But in those days, parents and children didn't have the same rapport as they do now. He was a very strong, silent type, and we never knew anything about this until he wrote around about the 40s or 50s, the government wanted everybody's story, wanted an account of everybody's story. So my father and his secretary, Lucy, they wrote his account of his adventures. And it was only then that we knew anything about what was going on.
Mm.
We didn't know anything about any breakup in the family or anything. We didn't notice it because by the time we came along, he was in charge of a very successful business. Very busy man. He had no time for trivial stuff.
But see in that document, and I mean that's on the National Military Archives Bureau. You can find that.
Yeah.
He only wrote up to the point where the Civil War breaks out.
Yeah.
But did he ever talk about what happened after?
Never.
No. Is that an indication of how bad it was, or they just couldn't talk about it?
Because they were involved in stuff that they didn't want anybody to know about. We don't know how much his involvement was. Yeah. But this is the kind of background that we came from. We were living next door to them, and the only difference we could see in my granny's house and in our house was that we got the Irish Press and they got the Independent. We got the Journal and they got the People's Press. And my grandmother was always out and didn't have a wee peep at her journal. And we wondered about this, but nobody ever told us the history of the split in the family at all.
Right.
But it says an awful lot for the quality of the men that they did reconcile. There was no signs of any disruption at all in the company. My father took charge of the company, and the rest of them all worked as foremen and tradesmen in the company all down through the years. There was never any enmity shown at all.
And was, like, now I remember Granda as a young boy growing up in Carrick, was he a fairly dominant man, like, compared to his brothers? Was he kind of the strongest personality?
Oh, my father?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, he was very strong. Yeah. Well, he had to be strong with the stuff that he experienced through his life. But they were strong as well. You know, they were very, Josie and them would be very strong-minded people. But all through our lifetime, they got on very well. And of course, my grandfather was the complete opposite of my father. He was a very placid man. I never heard him. He was full of fun, and I never heard him giving out or talking about anybody, you know. Anything derogatory about anybody.
Was he a storyteller, or?
No, he wasn't.
No,
he wasn't. As I say, in those days, children and adults were two different tribes. They would tell you stories, all right, you know, but there was never any real conversation going on between adults and children. That I always thought about that when I was growing up. I always said to myself, "Now this is not going to happen to me. Whenever I have a family, I'm going to involve them in everything, tell them everything, because my father was a stranger to me, always was. And then the number of times I had an adult conversation with him, very, very, very little. But he was a great man's man. He was a great man with his workers. I got on well with them. He treated them all very well all the time.
Was he a generous man? Was he a generous man?
He was a very fair man. Very fair. He was honest, generous. He was generous, but we didn't go around with loads of pocket money or anything like that. He didn't spoil us in any way at all. Just with everybody, we were treated like. It's a hard one to.
Yeah. But was that? I mean, you obviously growing up at that time, you obviously knew he was doing well.
Oh yeah.
Was there any kind of resentment?
Well, we knew. I mean, our house was a new house and had a lot of modern stuff in it, and none of the other houses in Carrick had. But we never realised that until later on in life. You know, we'd flush toilets and stuff like that and running water before anybody else had it. But I never felt any resentments from my friends. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Or even like a resentment that he maybe, you know, that he was, you were well off, but just weren't treated any better than, you know.
Yeah.
They just have toys that other kids didn't have, or they just, you know what I mean? Did he spoil you in any way like that?
No, but he'd always, if he went away somewhere, he'd always have something back for you.
Right.
But he was great. He was a great storyteller. He would always, when he came back, he used to travel a lot himself. And my mother would go in holidays to Spain and Italy, and before anybody else was used to going over there. But he would tell the whole story from he left the house until he came back again.
Right.
Everybody that he met. And he was that kind of a personality that he got on well with people. He'd be in conversation with bishops and everything like that. And he treated everybody the same, you know.
When you mentioned holidays there, did you ever go on a family holiday?
Never.
Never?
We never went on holiday together. Funny, I was thinking about that the other day. The way people now take their families away on holidays. There's none of that. Just myself and my mother would go away. They would book a flight and away they would go, and that was it.
and you were just all left at home.
We were just all left at home. But we didn't. We had no feeling that we were losing out on anything.
Right.
Kids always accept this is the way things are, and they don't query them.
Yeah.
You know? Sometimes you'd love to have an hour with them again and ask them, what did they think of this? What did they think of this?
I remember in the house there used to be an old vinyl recording that he done. Was it in the Empire State or somewhere in New York? He sent back that from America. Have you ever heard that?
I don't remember that. No.
I've heard it.
Have you?
It used to be a thing that you were going to the Empire State Building. I think it was the Empire State.
Yeah.
And you could record a record.
Yeah.
And then he took us back, and there was greetings from America.
Oh, right.
With your dad talking.
I remember the concept, but I don't remember.
We remember hearing that. It used to be in our house in Carrick now.
All right.
I don't know where it is now. But it was. I always thought at the time, like, God, that was I suppose it must have been the early 50s. And I mean, flights to America they flew over to America. That was a big deal.
Oh, actually, he went on the Queen Mary.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was a flight.
Which was a bigger deal, I thought myself. Because the time I went to America, it was touch and go whether I would sail or take the plane.
Right.
So, no, I remember that. The American holiday already. There was a. I don't know whether it should.
Oh, talk away.
My father actually was fond of a wee drink every now and again, you know, when he would go on wee benders and stuff like that. But he went to New York. I think he spent nearly a month in New York, and then went to Chicago, and then he went to Kansas City. He went round all his relatives, and he came back on the Queen Mary to Southampton, and Marlene was in Southampton to meet him. Went down to meet him. She was working in the hospital there in Southampton, and she was like the rest of us. She was wondering if he had a wee drop on him when he would be on holidays, but she was waiting to see him coming down off the boat and wondering what kind of state he'd be in. He came down, and he had one of them wee hats on him, wee party hats. So she was figuring, and we were all figuring that he probably was partying up to the last minute. But then when he came home, it was great when he came back again, telling us about his time in America.
Did he go on his own?
He went on his own, yeah.
And tell me about your mum, because I do remember Granny, but I mean, we were very young when she died. Like, was she? We did a different kind of relationship with her, or?
Oh, she was completely different.
Right.
My mother now was absolutely. My father was everything. My father was, nobody questioned. But you know, we could talk to her as freely. I mean, it was like two different people altogether. She was really tender and loving to us and all the rest of it. But my father was the boss, no question about it.
Right.
My father got up in the morning, he opened the workshop at 8 o'clock. And the lunchtime was at 12, and he came home, and the dinner had to be sitting, waiting for him. That's the kind of guy he was, you know. Everything was time. My father was never late for anything in his life.
Right.
And the rest of us were like that too. Bit of a pain in the ass, you know. But
your mum must have had a strong personality. I mean, knowing people like Auntie Kay and Auntie Mary and all that, she must have had a strong personality underneath all that.
Who?
Your mum.
Oh, she did, surely. She was a different person. We talk about this a lot among ourselves, the brothers, when we were saying that the difference between the Dohertys and the Cunninghams is just unbelievable. You see, the Cunninghams are all very, very serious and steady kind, you know.
Reserved.
The Dohertys are all full of fun.
Right.
Now, in our house, if Auntie Mary and Auntie Annie and them all came in together, you'd hear nothing but laughing coming from them, you know. They'd be talking about the old times that they had in Bavin. And they had rough times, you know. They really had a tough time. My mother and her family. Auntie Mary was the oldest of 13 children.
Right.
And her father died. My granddad Dorothy died when he was, I think it was 1905 he died. And he was a contractor as well.
Yeah.
And he had tendered for 2 schools. And there was one of them was in Killybegs and the other was, I can't remember where the other one was. But he got all the stuff. He came up to Derry and bought all the blocks and all the cement and everything. It all landed at the station in Killybegs. And didn't he catch a cold and turned to fever and he died.
Yeah.
And all the stuff was sitting there. And
he died, well, that must have been very quick. He must have died very quick.
He did. He died within weeks.
Right.
Yeah. And they wouldn't take the stuff back. The companies wouldn't take it back. So they had to all pay everything back to them. They had a lot of property about Kilcar at the time. He had different houses and they had to sell everything. My Uncle Eddie, the oldest of the boys, went to America and Auntie Mary was teaching. So they spent years before they paid off the debt. And there was my grandmother with 13 kids to rear in 1905. I never knew either of them. My grandmother died shortly after I was born.
Was your grandfather on the Doherty side, was he the engineer, the man that built the bridges, or was that a different man?
No, he did all the bridges and stuff like that and roads, and he'd have been a stonemason. He must have been very good because he worked for the railway companies and built a lot of their bridges and stuff like that. He built the old bridge at you'll have to forgive me, between Glenties and Dunlow, you know that.
Letcher McAward there. Letcher Bridge, is it?
No, don't call it the Letcher Bridge. It's well known, but anyway, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But your father used to tell me that there was your father worked down there at some stage in that locality, and there was some wee road.
Bridge.
Keepa, yeah, that's. Just one of us as bad as the other. Your father maintained that there's still a road down near the Great Barra Bridge called the Doherty's Road.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was named after him.
That was named after him.
I mean, that's a fine bridge there.
That's the new
modern
bridge there
right.
now, so there's just modernised since.
Right.
I remember the time the Great Barra Bridge, you couldn't have 2 cars on it at the same time. That's the one that the Dohertys built. Now, whether they were the main contractors on it or not is something I don't know. I don't think they were, you know. I think they just did certain aspects. My father had a great memory for stuff.
Right.
You know.
And obviously this was before.
He was that wee bit older than me.
Yeah.
You know, at that stage, he was only 2 years older, but I remember talking to him. I would ring him up and ask him about stuff. You know, be going along and I'd say, I wonder what happened. Geez, I must give Jim a ring.
Right.
But he would always know, of course, him being in Carrick all the time. And never been away anywhere. He knew everything that was going on. He was like Francis Lawrence, he knew everything. But Jim used to tell me stories too that I hadn't heard as a kid, you see. So.
And Dad would have driven for your father. Wouldn't he have driven him about?
Well, this is it too. You see,
your father never drove, did he?
He had pardon?
Your father didn't drive himself. Somebody had to drive him everywhere.
Somebody had to drive him everywhere, surely, but it wouldn't be correct to say he never drove himself. During the 50s, we got this. he was doing very well, and I don't know many vehicles we had with a car and a van and 2 lorries and stuff like that. But he bought this wee Ford 8 van, a wee red van, and everybody in Carrick learned to drive on it. They called it the Red Terror because everybody was terrorised. But one day there was a nail had to go to the bog, and whatever happened, the driver didn't turn up. And there was, I don't know, many men got into this wee van, and my father decided to drive them into Laurentia. And it took them men about a week to get over the terror. He was all over the road. He never learned to drive, but he decided he remembered enough about the gear and everything.
And he wouldn't have had a wee drink in him when he was driving?
Oh, no. No, he didn't drink when he was working at all.
Right.
He just had the odd little binge,
Right.
And he never did anything untoward like that. But that was the end of his driving. So Jim drove him everywhere.
Right.
Jim was a great driver, and he used to drive the lorries and he'd drive the car. Many's the time the two of us went to Dublin on the lorry for Hanleys and Sligo. We go, getting stuff, take it out of Killybegs and Ardra, everywhere there was houses being built. But I remember one time we were working at the factory in Kilcar, and we had there was a big flat roof in the factory in Kilcar, and I had to get these steel things to lay the concrete on. I forget what the technical term for them is, but we had to rent them out and in Dublin, some company in Dublin, and myself and your father headed out in the morning, taking them back to Dublin. So we took them into Dublin, unloaded them up to Kildare to get a whole load of sewer pipes, and back to Carrick.
Jeez.
And one day, and your father wouldn't even let me take the wheel for it. He was wily bad. He wouldn't let you drive.
Right.
He didn't trust me. And I was.
Was there a reason for that?
I would say there might be a reason for that. Jim was a serious driver, but he was a very good driver. I remember one time we were coming home from Dublin with a load of flooring, very long flooring. I think it was a red Ford 8 car or Ford lorry we had at the time. The boards were swaying away, and we were coming up. At that time we came up over the Curlews into Sligo. We always went through Sligo and Mullingar. That was the road to Dublin at the time. But we were coming up this and started swaying, and the things started going back. And Jim could feel there was no pressure on the wheel at all. Nearly lifting the front wheel of the lorry up. And we didn't know what to do. We came eventually to this long wall, and he just pulled up and reversed the lorry into the wall and pushed the planks away up.